What's up, everybody? It's Alex from Heavy New York, and on the phone we got Ardek from Carach Angren. Thank you for your time today, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot for the interview, and hope you're doing okay out there.
Yeah, I'm doing all right. Again, I've interviewed a lot of like black metal and doom metal bands in the quarantine zone, and I think it's the most metal thing I've ever done in my entire life. So,
Yeah, it's a kind of special thing, right?
yeah. But the newest album is Frankensteinia Stratamatanas. Again, I've been rehearsing, practicing that for the last 2 weeks. What I'm curious is, do you think that do you consider this just a follow-up to Dance and Laughed Amongst the Rotten, or do you think that this is like a new start for Carach Angren in a way?
Well, in a way, it's a logical consequence of the previous album, but I also feel that it is both sound-wise, composition-wise, a huge step for us. So it's not just a continuation of the last album, but I think it's for us it feels like a new level. Exactly.
Okay, being that this is the sixth album for you guys, do you have like a formula or a sound that you tend to like to stick with, or do you think that you'd like to experiment with your sound and take a new approach to everything?
It's a bit of both. I mean, we have been doing horror and ghost concept albums since the beginning, so that's like our core identity. And there are a few things like that have grown with us, like for example, complexity, lots of complex parts in a song, at the same time catchy parts. So we always aim for that, and on every record to keep that alive. But also, and especially on this album, we have experimented some more, just because we need that as artists. You know, you need to develop and have a fresh outlook on things. And so we try to reinvent ourselves, but it's always tricky because if you go too far, you change the whole identity. So that's always a very delicate balance. Yeah.
Of course. And being that, would you say that the single that you released off this album, The Vampire of Nuremberg, do you think that this could serve as like a clear representation of what maybe the entire album is going to sound like, or is it going to be a lot more diverse?
It's a lot more diverse. I had an interview earlier, and it was a nice view. They said like he listened to the singles and then he listened to the whole album, and then he felt that the singles sounded differently. So that maybe gives a little bit of a peek into what people can expect. So the singles don't really represent the whole album, because it's so much relying on the story and the atmosphere in the entire thing. It's hard to pick one or two songs out and say this is it. But for example, the title song is a very new kind of thing we've done, but it gives some insight into the new sides of things, and the song Monster as well. So what you could say about the singles is that The Vampire is more of an old school track, and it gives a little bit, a view of what we have been doing so far.
Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know if maybe you're the most appropriate member to ask this too, but like being that you always have these concepts of like the supernatural and, incorporating many different, ideas into the concept of the band, could the stories of what the songs are about determine the outcome of the music as well?
Yeah, it's always a balance. With this one, it started actually when I had a nightmare about I was floating in a house and I heard like dissonant piano tones, and then I saw the painting of an old man, and I was like drawn towards it, and then I woke up. So I was startled by this and made a little drawing of the face I saw, and I tried to play those piano tones. And then I went on about it. I had a discussion with Sergor, like what we were going to do next. We're talking about Frankenstein, and he was very excited about it because he connected to it as a kid to the movie. And I never had that connection, and I also felt that Frankenstein has been, very popular in media and pop culture. So I felt if we're going to do it, we need an original angle. And then I started, some research. So I started to read Mary Shelley's novel. I was blown away by the content, emotional content, and I thought there is a lot of stuff here that is not being told so far. And I started my research further, and then I learned that she got inspired. There is a theory by this guy called Johann Conrad Dippel, who was alchemist, also theologian, and notorious figure in Europe. And so I started digging into that, and then I found this image of him, and he looked a lot about like the face I saw in my dream. So then I had like personal motivation, so to speak. And So yeah, and during all that research and stuff, I was composing stuff, and we were trying things out, and then it sort of starts falling into place. So it's like an ongoing process that takes a long time, actually. So yeah.
That's very interesting. Would a listener better have an understanding of the story of this album if they started off with song one, Here in German Woodland, and ended with Like a Conscience Parasite I Roam? Or could a listener, being that, Vampire of Nuremberg was the first single release, could a listener almost like approach this album from any different angle?
Musically, yes, because we always say that we want the singles and the songs to be able to stand on their own and to be enjoyable. But if you really like the story and you want to have the whole experience, I recommend starting from scratch, from the beginning, and let yourself through. And that's true for every album we've done, but especially this one. And so yeah, exactly like you say. Yeah.
Okay. Is the story open to interpretation, or do you try to maybe engage your listeners into what the songs or even the concept could be about?
It's first and foremost to set an atmosphere and to engage people, but there is enough, and there's not so much linearity, so there's room for interpretation, and I really like that, because sometimes people come to us like, yeah, this and that, you put this number and that track, and it's brilliant, and then I think like we never put that there, so people find things in the story or connections that they make themselves, and that's a really cool thing. So we always don't try to set things completely in stone.
Yeah. Is there ever a time, though, whether people are listening to Death Came Through a Phantom Ship or This Is No Fairy Tale or even this new album, is there any aspect of your personal lives invested into this album as well, or do you try to use music as just a complete escape from who you are?
No, I think that you really bleed into the music, and probably in ways that you don't know yourself. I know that, for example, especially Saragor, I see him almost like a method actor. Like when we were recording the vocals, you have to see it. He's so into it, and that's why it sounds so strong and convincing. So I knew, for example, that on This Is No Fairy Tale, he really, put some personal experience into it. Musically, I think too, like you can hear, like people sometimes think, okay, if you write this kind of music, you need to be super depressed or something, and maybe for some people that's true, but I feel like I write better the healthier I am and the happier I am. So that's the paradox.
Yeah.
And so maybe like when you're struggling, you know that, okay, you need to maybe get your shit together first and then come back to writing. But I like the fact that the albums reflect our personalities as well and the things we were interested in at the time. So they are almost like a diary, and that's also cool. I mean, it needs to be like that. It doesn't just need to be a product or something.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear you say that. Right before you, I actually just interviewed Paradise Lost, which is, they're the kings of doom and gloom, and they even said, no, we like to write when we're very happy. I'm like, it almost seems to be the trend nowadays.
Yeah. But I remember in an interview I saw from Danny Elfman when he was working on the score for Dumbo, and then he was like, yeah, I knew it was going to be a very sad movie, and I was so happy. He said, I was going to write sad music, so it's kind of the same thing. Like, but I mean, yeah, writing is training, because it's an endeavor. A lot of times it doesn't work, and you have to put in a lot of work without any results immediately. And it's kind of straining sometimes. Maybe people have a romantic view, like you sit and all the melodies pour out. It doesn't usually happen. You have to get up early, you have to take care of yourself, you have to, practice, and then sometimes there are days when nothing happens and you really don't like what you have done. Yeah. And then you feel like I haven't done anything, and you have to reset your mind. No, you have done a lot. Yeah. It's much easier, for example, to move a pile of stones and get a paycheck, and then you feel like I've done something. So much.
Yeah. Well, I also think, because you don't want to, like, if you do write music, if you do use pain as a paintbrush, don't like force the pain. Don't like look for trouble. I feel like if you're going to write about an essence of darkness in your life, it has to come naturally. Otherwise, it's just going to look insincere.
Yeah, and like you say, that's actually on the spot, because Usually what you have to do is get out of the way, because as a natural thing, at least for me, you tend to be in the way. I sit down here, I'm going to make this, and you're going to think about it, but when you think, it doesn't work because you're like blocking it. So it's usually when you relax and just let it go. Or I had, for example, the riff in Frankenstein, the title track, the opening riff. I remember that clearly. I was like sitting at the piano for a couple of hours, and it was just all not really appealing to me. And then I walked away, and I came back one more time, and I was sort of casually pressing some keys, like, yeah, whatever. And I thought, hey, that's cool. So usually in the moment when you give up and you do it one more time, something comes out. That just illustrates that, at least for me, so I'm usually in my own way, trying to think it out.
Yeah, you kind of in a way just answered this question though, but like, do you look for inspiration, whether it is musically or conceptually, or does inspiration just come out of nowhere sometimes, or do you prefer to like put yourself in a certain place at a certain time in order to get into creative mode?
Yeah, I think what you need to do, at least for me, is that I have tried to block everything out, but that also sometimes doesn't work, because then there's not really anything new coming in. So I like to get excited, and it can be watching a movie, it can be reading a book, but just playing around with the instrument, listening other things, new things, maybe outside of metal, it can be anything. And then keep working, disciplined, and then these things sort of merge into your end product in ways that you don't control usually, because I sometimes have no idea how these things come together. But your mind is like a voice in your head that tries to claim everything you do, like, oh yeah, I did that, and you did it like this, and blah blah blah. So I think it comes from deep within, and the main thing I do, for example, if I go for a long run, the blood rushes through you and you feel like revived, and that's usually a good time to sit down and try something. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And do you have like a background in theory too? Because the symphonic and orchestral elements of your band is just absolutely mind-blowing to me. And like, I've actually tried to transcribe, I'm a keyboard player myself, and like, I've actually tried to like transcribe some of your songs on piano, and like, it really does have like a theoretical, like in the key of this. Do you think about that, or do you improvise?
Yeah, I know about it. I know theory. I know the chords. So that's a really huge adventure. I had a lot of keyboard lessons as a kid, like for 8 years, and also theory. So I know, and by practicing, I also learned a lot about the orchestra, what they can do, what they cannot do, and the advantage of making everything yourself is that you can do things that are maybe not possible. So, but at least I know how to build a convincing orchestral perception in that sense, and so yeah, that's a huge advantage. But at the same time, it's like you say, like if you sit down and you try to think it out, like A minor 7 and then to C this, and then usually it doesn't work. But what I like is that I am able to play on the piano and also a bit on the guitar, so I can just go about it and just let it happen. Yeah, and then in a later stadium you start analyzing the ideas a bit better and decide, like, okay, this melody is too straining for the cello, it sounds thin, so I move it to the violas, for example, and then you start orchestrating. But with coming up with the ideas, it's usually nice to just have an instrument like a piano and come up with it, press the chords, melodies.
Yeah. Do you like Frédéric Chopin at all? Because I see some of that in your piano playing.
I'm not really connected to him. I like Bach a lot, really a lot. I like Tchaikovsky, Stravinsky really much when it comes down to orchestration. But some Chopin I have heard, but not really much. But it could be that it's maybe somehow there.
Yeah, I see a similar aura in your discography as I do with him, as well as Eric Satie, which when I've told a couple of people that, they looked at me like I was an idiot. But I mean,
no, I mean, it's a great honor. Those are not the smallest names.
Yeah. Now, yeah. One thing I was really curious about is I ask a lot of musicians in the genre this, but going by Ardek, are you portraying like a different character in the album and on stage than who you are personally, or is Ardek direct extension of who you personally are?
It's a good question. Um, it does feel like an extension, but also it's a different world because we put on the makeup. The intro starts, it's dark when you think about a live thing, and it's sort of a mystical experience in that sense. And the audience is like, looking at me, and I love it a lot. But at the same time, there is also, I remember this, for example, when I had a fantastic gig in Mexico City. It was a huge gig. People were completely crazy as they go in South America, and it was like everyone's fan. Everyone wants an autograph, and it's like this big thing. And then you come home, you sit in the bus with two people, so it's complete transition. And so I like also my own privacy and my own alone time and all of that, and I never get caught up in that world completely because it's also not entirely real, because it's just a moment, and when you are on tour every night, it's the moment for some people that have been looking forward to it. They have been collecting money for this concert and and we have to deliver it every day, and so yeah, it's it's a great honor to be able to to go on stage and do these things and focus on this aspect of me, exclusively playing the keyboard, in that sense, making music. But it's not the whole of who I am.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, because you in a way like have this portrayal of yourself on stage, do you almost have to? Is there maybe like a similar energy when you're creating music or when you're recording it? Like, do you almost have to bring that character or that energy out into the studio as you do on stage, or is playing live and songwriting just a completely separate mind frame?
Well, live there is the really the focus in the moment. It's like, because it's happening in an hour or 45 minutes, so it's you feel excited, sometimes a little bit nervous. So that's like a completely different experience. So when we are home and we're trying to make music, there's less pressure. There's more of the everyday. You're sitting with a cup of coffee and all of these things. But at the same time, in my mind, you try to draw a picture of, this is going to be on an album. This is going to be a continuation of what we've been doing, and there's expectations. And so, yeah, I try to make the movie in my head and keep that world alive while playing and composing. But live, there is much more energy focused in one particular moment. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to songwriting, and like, do you find it maybe the longer you work on something, the harder it is to actually capture a moment?
You mean trying to make a song?
Yeah.
Or, depends. Like, it depends what it is that you try to do. For example, I was working on something completely different now, and it was more atmospheric. And there, what I like is just adding little things slowly. So then you're not really looking for a melody, for example. With Carach, I often try to find the perfect chorus or the perfect hook. If you take a song like on the new album, Skull with a Forked Tongue, it has a very, at least I think, a very memorable kind of chorus melody. And then you can sometimes spend the day before you have it, or sometimes you don't have it. And then it's like, and when it happens, it just happens. Yeah, like, for example, building an intro is usually easier, and you can spend more time because it's like a build-up. It's more setting of an atmosphere. But the things where I really put a lot of effort and time is like finding that really great moment in a song.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you ready for the most difficult question now of the whole interview?
Of course.
Yeah. How do you know when a song is done?
You feel it. It was actually today I finished a demo I was doing for something else, and I've been working on it for 4 days. And there is this point, like, for example, yesterday I was working on the song, and I still had like, I need to do something on that point, this transition. And today I was like, it's like, how can you describe this? It just comes to an end. You're like clicking through the project on the computer, and you're trying things, and you're adding things that don't work anymore. So I was adding some rhythm, and I played it back, and I was like, no, this is too much. So usually when you feel like it's too much, that usually for me is like a sign, okay, this is it. Yeah. So, and usually that's like a natural process. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it also helps, like kind of going back to the classical training again. I think it really helps because sometimes, sure, you're not thinking about every key or every form, but having that in your in the back of your mind, it's like you don't think about it, but it almost kind of inevitably helps you in structure, whether you realize it or not, and maybe that helps it as well.
Yeah, and like you said, like you're a keyboard player as well, and so the advantage is when you play an actual instrument instead of just clicking things in the computer, is that you have a kind of connection to the melody you play. So you feel like da 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 da, and you feel like, okay, this is the start, this is the end. So you already filter things out during the composition process. So when you actually record it, it already sounds like, hey, this is played for real. Although usually you start adding samples and stuff to the material. But so I really like that part too. Like just sitting at the piano. I have, for example, songs like Charles Francis Coughlin from the previous album. They are like entirely played on the piano, and they were composed at the piano before everything else was transformed into guitars and drums. And so that's like a good filter as well. And then once that setup is done, you start like doing more arranging and production. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, do you see colors when you play notes? Do you have synesthesia?
No, not really, but I see, and I get excited, and I see, sometimes I see something running, or I see, like with this album, I can see the little child in the first song running as a zombie, or like moving as a zombie, and then I start to think like, what does it sound like? It sounds like, and I start, looking for synthesizer sounds that sound like zombies.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, but I don't see colors, no.
Okay, yeah. Well, clearly, though, experimenting with the notes and everything helps to envelop a vision which would influence this concept.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep. So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today. Is there just anything else with Carach Angren that you would like to promote? The new album's coming out in June 26th. I know that thanks to a certain virus that shall not be named, touring is a little bit up in the air now, but obviously when the album drops and when this is all over, we'll probably be seeing you on the road quite a bit, right?
Yes, definitely. And thanks for the interview. Stay safe, and we hope to be back in the States soon again.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Everybody, we are here with Ardek of Carach Angren, Frankensteinius Stratomotanis, if I said that correctly, coming out on Season of Mist, June 26th. Be sure to pick it up then. This is Alex from Heavy New York. We'll see you next time.